everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Trademark Abilities Insider. My name is Stacy Calamaris, and I'm a trademark attorney and the lead instructor at Trademark Abilities. Trademark Abilities is a comprehensive online training academy for lawyers interested in learning the practical aspects of practicing trademark law at the USPTO and becoming confident trademark practitioners. Through our signature masterclass, we provide the practical and strategic learning necessary to set up a trademark practice so that lawyers can confidently and effectively represent clients before the USPTO. Our templates and other resources have been described by our attorneys as a trademark practice in a box. I want to welcome you, Tamara, to Trademark Abilities Insider. Through this series, it is my intention to interview people like you who have insider knowledge that helps make the life of a trademark practitioner a bit easier. And with that, I'd like it to turn it over to you, please, to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stacy. I'm so happy to be here today and the opportunity to kind of share my story, some insider tips, and what we do. So my name is Tamara Rabenold, and the company I own is Vaudra International. Just as a little background, Vaudra was founded in March of 2003 with a corporate focus on intellectual property investigations. I joined the company in February of 2004, so I've been here nearly since the very beginning. I became a licensed as a PI associate and cut my teeth on trademark use investigations. So that's how everybody starts out here at our company. I learned the ways of long arm investigations and brand protection strategies from the founders, Randy Rabenold and Howard Dozier. And since then, I've conducted thousands of investigations into companies and individuals, or as we tend to kind of collectively call them, the bad guys, all over the world, ranging in complexity and scope. Now, through the years, I've worked in all different aspects of the company operations as I grew as an investigator and developed a real passion for intellectual property. And when I started as a PI associate 17 years ago, I'm not sure that I could have imagined that I'd be here right now. I'm a true believer in everything happens for a reason, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I mean, the IP industry is fascinating and always changing. We have the opportunity to collaborate with amazing clients to support their brands. The investigative world is constantly expanding with new technologies and investigative strategies, and we learn something new every single day. So I acquired 100% ownership as of January 1 from Randy Rabenold, who, as luck has it, I also married in 2015 after meeting him here and working together for many years. So as you can imagine, Vaudra is close to my heart in many ways.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we should mention that when we talk about PI today in this context, we're talking about a private investigator, not a personal injury practice area. So we'll just mention that for those listening who may not be familiar with working with private investigators in the trademark context, just to put that clarification out there. So Tamara, can you speak in general terms just about the type of investigations that you're typically called upon to do for your clients, whether they're other trademark lawyers, like I've worked with, I haven't had the pleasure of working with you yet, but I've worked with many trademark investigators, or with other brand owners?
Well, we're regularly asked to conduct investigations into trademark use, complete evidential purchases, conduct online enforcement on a customized basis, background and due diligence investigations related to a potential party for further action, as well as anonymous IP acquisitions. And that may be a domain, social media handle, or another IP asset. And, really it varies so greatly from day to day. And there's certainly trends that pop up too. Like recently, we've been supporting an attorney client with a number of third-party infringement investigations stemming from the cannabis industry, since that's really a hot area right now of, budding, budding case law and all of the different things going on in that space.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've worked a lot with trademark investigators, as you were talking about, in trying to narrow down use, right? So we do a full search report and we see some use, or we see a citation and we're just really not sure. We can't determine really if there's use. So we would hire someone like you to really try to get behind that to see if there's use, or how it comes up a little bit more specifically is where there's maybe a citation in an office action and the mark has been registered for a number of years, but maybe we just do some quick research online and we're not sure if the mark is in use anymore. Or the registration is in use anymore. And so we may speak to someone like you to try to track that down. So how does that work? How does someone maybe who hasn't worked with a trademark investigator, how do they go about engaging you? What types of details do you need from them?
Well, I mean, we can work with as little as a name, a phone number, an email address. I mean, whatever that mark is that, you know, if there's a pending application or a registration, providing that registration. That's really all we need as a jumping off point, because if you say, okay, this is the mark I'm interested in, this is the registration or application number. I mean, the first thing we're going to do is go to the USPTO if we're not provided with that. So the more that we can get from that upfront, or any research that you've done on the front end, we've done a couple searches here and there. That's always good to have as a jumping off point. But really, it's as much or as little you have time to do, because, you know, I mean, that's what we do all day long. So we're always excited to kind of just jump in.
Okay, great. How is your process and your methodology impacted when the mark owner is not based in the US? I know I personally have had a lot of challenges when I'm trying to find use for a mark that's owned by a foreign owner. Can you speak a little bit about the challenges, if there are any, in that process?
Sure. Well, now, since we regularly conduct investigations into international entities and parties, it's part of our blood. It's what we do all the time. So that certainly makes it easier for us. It's not anything uncommon. But, you know, in looking at something like that, we know that it has, if it's an international entity that has this trademark registration, we know it has the potential to be more difficult and take more time than like a typical investigation into a US entity's use.
Sure.
It requires us to use and potentially access a whole different array of resources. We can even get people involved on the ground if it's needed, but that can really be a expensive time suck. It's not necessary. So we usually try to avoid that. And of course, a big thing, you know, presuming that we're permitted to contact the entity and assuming that we can locate a viable contact method, getting a response and engaging in dialogue that can really benefit a use, non-use trademark investigation, that piece can be kind of have an added layer of complexity to it. And of course, when feedback from that other side is kind of a critical component to the case, or is really going to help bolster like what you do or don't find online, the most frustrating part for an investigator is reaching out through, you know, whatever app, website, phone number, email, social media, WeChat, QQ Messenger, whatever it is, and we cannot compel the other side to respond. Because sometimes, I mean, we love to win. I mean, we love to win for our clients, and sometimes you don't find use and you're like, darn it, okay, well, but that is the win here. And sometimes you have to recognize that too.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things in there I just want to sort of circle back on. So you said provided you're allowed to contact the other side. So is that part of your kind of intake process where you would ask the client if that's something that they want you to do?
Yes, absolutely. Like it is literally, it doesn't matter what kind of case it is. You know, there's ones that are more obvious that there's going to have to be some kind of undercover dialogue that has to take place. But we always ask, are we permitted to contact the other party or any parties affiliated using a suitable approach in the course of our investigation, if deemed appropriate? It's not a go-to immediate. We're going to do some due diligence and kind of start with that background investigation on the front end. But then a lot of times, you know, the best place to go is to the horse's mouth. So
why would a client say no to that?
You know, there's been conversation through the years, but we don't use the term pretexting because that is, I mean, that has become a dirty word in the investigative space. And that's not what we do. You know, any kind of approach we're making, you know, it's going to be a complete fictitious entity that is only related to us. Because you have to kind of build that conversation and build your own rapport, not based on anything that that other party may assume. And of course, also you're doing it within their regular course of business. You're not asking them to go out of the normal scope of anything in having a conversation or dialogue.
So I wanted to sort of circle back. Why shouldn't attorneys themselves undertake this line of investigation on their own? Why should they go through a licensed PI as opposed to having their paralegal try to do this research on their own? What is the difference?
Well, I know there's definitely bar rules and feedback related to how attorneys are allowed to present themselves and if something is obtained in deceptive way. So, aside from that, which, we would never, is it worth being disbarred? Is it worth being called out, or suddenly having evidence that you're like, oh my gosh, I got the silver bullet in this conversation and now you can't use it because you're afraid how it may blow back on you. So there's all of that, but we also always have a backstop. So, whether we're making an evidentiary purchase or we're having that undercover dialogue through whatever avenue, everything's going to tie to a cover entity. So we don't need to worry about being found out as investigators or being found out as an attorney that, and everything's going to our law firm's address. Like, you just don't want to have to raise those kind of questions in the subject's mind if they even look that close, which a lot of times they don't, let's be honest. As PIs, we tend to be a little paranoid. And so we just kind of really kind of button up that backstory so that we're confident when we approach that we're like, hey, just want to make a deal. What can you do for me? Where can I buy this? How long have you been selling? How many can I get? How many do you have on hand?
Right. And you can even make a purchase of the product. If it's like a counterfeit product or an infringing product, you can make that purchase on behalf of your client if they authorize you to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and just kind of a side note on that, obviously when we're dealing with infringement or counterfeit, a lot of times an evidential buy is kind of part of the package.
Of course.
That the client wants us to do. On the trademark use side, if we happen to find use or we found it on a website or they said, oh, we can send you a sample, we would never have them actually provide us with something physical without getting authorization from the client, because sometimes that can just blow up the whole case when you're like, great, thanks, you just created use in the United States, so
right.
We're very cautious of it. Like, we've worked a lot of, trademark use cases, IP cases. We think about all of these things when it's like.
No, that's a really good point, right? So if the conversation between you and me is, we don't think there's been use for more than 3 years, we can't find any, your investigation relays that, and then all of a sudden, right, they ship something in. It's unlikely one of, a box of cereal, right? But one of a jetliner could create use, right? So it's all in the ordinary course of trade, right? So one stick of, one package of chewing gum is not likely to create use, right? But one of a yacht or one of a boat or one of a car could create use. So it's very industry specific. So that's a very, very good point that you bring up.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, we're going to report the facts.
Right. You're not going to make the legal determinations. That's not your job.
Right, exactly. So we will give you the facts. And then, like I said, sometimes people love the facts. Sometimes the facts are not in your favor, but they're the facts regardless.
Right. Exactly. Nope. I got it. So I know you're aware, right? We have this Trademark Modernization Act. We're all talking about it. We're all monitoring it. It was slipped into the COVID relief bill at the end of last year, and it's going to become effective later this year. And we're still kind of waiting to see exactly how the USPTO is going to implement it. But a huge part of it are these expungement actions that are going to be part of the Trademark Modernization Act. And it requires, before they're brought, that the person bringing the expungement action has conducted, quote, a reasonable investigation prior to initiating the expungement action. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look into this now that the USPTO has kind of initiated its initial thoughts on how they're going to implement. But how do you think this might play out in terms of what requirements might we as the trademark bar be under for what the reasonable investigation threshold may mean, and what implications might that have for how we may be working with you more to bring these actions next year?
Well, I've been fascinated with the whole TMA.
I know you have.
And with the rules that were released, and and of course the fact that reasonable investigation and just the term investigation in general is used so extensively just warms my heart, because obviously we love it. That's what we do. So we're like, yes. And I think it's really interesting, and like looking through the rules, and I kind of printed out the chunks that relate to the reasonable investigation requirement. I think it's important that it says, as a general matter, a single search using an internet search engine likely would not be considered a reasonable investigation. And I feel like there's so often where people just do a quick search and they think that's sufficient. And so I appreciate the USPTO realizes there's way too many places for information to be. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, they still want it to be in places that are more generally accessible. So we're not going into the deep dark web to find this information. It's going to be the stuff that's still up here, but you need to look on social media. You need to look on e-commerce channels, third-party payment
platforms.
Yes. And the different avenues out there, because it can be so many different places. And, it's kind of cool too, when they're talking about like what that investigation means. They kind of touch on like the who, what, when, where, why. Well, they step short of the why, which we always try to why are they using them? Why did they choose that mark? Why did they stop? Why did they start? And they're, because they say the elements of a reasonable investigation should, specifically describe the source of search, but there's your where, how and when the searches were conducted. I would add to say like when the use actually started and stopped versus just how and where the searches were conducted, and and what information, evidence, if any, the searches produced. And
so of course, it's very specific.
Yes, it is, and of course it also says should include reasonably accessible sources that can be publicly disclosed. So even though we may access closed source databases if we're trying to uncover more details on the entity or the individual, generally speaking, when it comes to use, it's going to be in those accessible sources that anybody could find.
Right.
We're just going to be a little more targeted and quick in finding it because it's what we do all day.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's great. Thank you so much for taking a look at that and summarizing that for us. I mean, I can tell you, having done many trademark investigations, and again, we haven't had the pleasure of working together yet, but the reports that I received, I mean, they're very, like you say, very fact driven. So it'll say, this was the task, we looked here, and you'll get the website. This is what we found. And then we looked here, and this was the information that we received. And then we called, Target X at this number. We spoke to Joe Schmo, and we learned in our conversation X, Y, and Z. So, when you talk about expungement, I can imagine you developing a certain product line if that is the service that someone will need, where it would be very streamlined, because if someone doesn't have the time or ability to look for that themselves, where you would just very quickly look at those available sources of information and provide a very neat and tidy package of exactly what would be needed to submit that. Because I think there's going to be a lot of these proceedings. I myself am very excited about this addition to the rules. I think it's needed. I know many think that the rules should have gone further. I think this is a good step.
And I think some other interesting things that were kind of in the rules were really also acknowledging the fact that a sufficient, reasonable investigation is going to depend on the individual circumstances.
Obviously.
And it's also, just because they're providing all these specifics on the different kinds of evidence, it's a non-inclusive list or non-exhaustive list, and it's not limiting them to specific types of evidence either. So if you have one shot and you only want to have to deal with this once for a client, why wouldn't you try to give it your best shot in that reasonable investigation for the expungement or cancellation, which of course in my mind is going to include that undercover piece that is not in that list, but that's kind of like the other reasonably accessible source with information establishing that the mark was never in use in commerce or was in use, blah blah blah. There's your contact.
Yeah.
So I really I'm excited about the rules. I'm excited that there's, some kind of structure around it, because obviously, it's what we do, but we feel like it's so important. And there's so many filings happening every day. It's pretty incredible.
Especially lately. Yeah, no, it is really important. I know you've been doing this a really long time. You told us that at the top of the conversation. Was there ever a time where you were really surprised by the outcome of a trademark investigation that you were doing, where it really took like a crazy turn?
We had a case involving a specialty sub-brand of sports equipment that was co-created through a licensing agreement between a manufacturer and a lifestyle brand. And sorry, it has to be so generic.
No, of course.
But the goods in commerce, so we found these goods in commerce, and that's what kind of like raised the flag for the client, the attorney client. The goods in commerce appeared to be a possible infringement on their client's mark. And so when we actually started digging into it, and of course the client was aware of this co-licensing agreement between these two entities. But what was funny is that in digging into it, we uncovered that the current goods in the marketplace were not the ones that were authorized through the licensing agreement. So it was supposed to be a limited run that was only offered on our specific website, not also in all of these sporting goods stores. So somebody, the manufacturer, very much overstepped.
Yeah, fascinating.
We were in touch with the lifestyle brand in the process, and they're like, "Oh no, that's not ours. We didn't have this." And we're like, funny. So you just never know. But that was definitely a surprising one.
What's one of the things you love most about doing trademark investigations? I know that you love this area.
Yeah, I do. Well, trademark investigations are usually like a quick hit. It's more, very clear objectives. When you've nailed it, when you've won it. There's more, like I said, that immediate gratification compared to other kinds of investigations. And it's kind of like you have that moment where it's like, oh, you hang up the phone and you're like, you just had the perfect conversation. I'll never forget one that I did many years ago where I had to call the subject's corporate office, and in-house counsel happens to be walking by the front desk when it rings. Answers, incredibly friendly, helpful, and confidently tells me that they aren't going to use the trademark again, the reasons why and when they stopped using it. And it's like all the stars align, and you hang up the phone and you're just like, oh, I need a drink, I need a cigarette, I need something. That was amazing, because you're just so excited that you're like, oh, nailed it. And so sometimes, sometimes there's some luck. There's skill for sure, but there's like timing and luck, as in anything in life.
As in anything, absolutely.
And I just would encourage anybody listening, gosh, don't be afraid to reach out to a PI and just ask for their opinion, their feedback, brainstorming. We're not hard to engage. So, if you have a question and you're not sure what to do, or if an investigator can even help in your situation, just have a conversation. Because you could be surprised, or you could be like, cool, you can do this yourself. Mission accomplished.
Yep, I agree. Well, Tamara, it's been so much fun hearing your insider point of view on this really important service that you provide to trademark practitioners. And I hope that people listening have learned a little something today. I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.